Hello, everybody. Let's play a game of imagination. If you are a platform engineer or someone responsible for the infrastructure of your organization, imagine that someone that you have never seen before comes to you and says, I need access to production. And if you are a data engineer, an analyst, or someone who works in AI, imagine that someone tells you that you will not ever see production data, that you can only get the access to the data in the dev environment, the one where developers test their code and play with their new features. And if you are none of those, then your role today is to sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. My name is Natalie Godec. I'm a system/DevOps/platform/cloud engineer and currently an architect at Zencore in London. Zencore is a boutique Google Cloud partner consultancy, and we help organizations build their next generation thing on Google Cloud. We operate in the UK, Ireland, Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. My specialties are in infrastructure, in data, and in security. I love security and everything that comes about it. Which is why when someone says that they need access to production, I get suspicious. I'm also a photographer, and you can find me on social media at @uvesvit. Don't hesitate to tweet at me if you find anything in today's talk interesting, curious, or rubbish. As part of my job, I talk to other teams a lot, and I talk to other companies a lot. Everyone has their own ways of working, everyone has their own language, their own priorities and goals, and everybody thinks that their need is the highest priority. And if your job is similar to mine, you probably think that you have seen it all when it comes to developers' needs and developers' demands. And if you are a data engineer or analyst, then for you, the core infrastructure team probably looks something like this. You probably have no idea what we do, and why we do it, and why we even exist. In fact, the talk about communication in the engineering department has been going on for a really long time. Do you remember when the term DevOps first appeared in your organization? Raise your hand if you remember the day when someone first said DevOps. In the industry as a whole, it first appeared like 20 years ago, in 2009, when Patrick Dubois was organizing an event in Ghent in Belgium and needed a name for it, so he configured, took developers and operations, and figured out that it would be called DevOpsDays. And I heard that he needed like a shorter hashtag, and so dropped days, and it just became DevOps, and it became a movement in the world. And it's been 14 years, and tonight, in the evening, we have an actual presentation from one of the co-organizers about what happened in those 14 years. We've been talking about this and organizing these events for so long. What happened? Back in the day, developers would write code and throw it over the wall to the sysadmins. And the sysadmins would be tasked with deploying that code, but also with maintaining the stability of the system. They had no idea what that code did and how to write code. They were sysadmins, ops people, operations people. So when things inevitably broke, they got annoyed at developers. And in an attempt to keep their systems more stable and more maintainable, they were reluctant to deploy new code, which annoyed developers. They only wanted their things to be deployed. The whole thing just didn't work very well. And so at some point, we as an industry figured out that things can be done better, so let's do something about it. That's how we ended up with DevOps. You've seen this chart for the past hour, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but we all know we had developers and operations people, and they didn't know how to talk to each other, and we've spent 2 decades trying to build communication. And now we kind of sort of know what each party does, and in fact, developers no longer look like weird children playing in the playgrounds to sysadmins, to the ops people. Ops people no longer look like wizards resuscitating dead to developers. And in fact, developers even manage their own infrastructure, well, like a lot of the time. But now, these days, if you tune into any big tech conference, or you listen to a trend alert in tech, or you listen to a new product announcement, you will notice that all we speak about is data. Data is super important, and by now we understand that the future of every company, of every organization, lays in data. Which means there is a new kid in the block of engineering. The data engineer, the analyst, the AI engineer, someone who develops models and pipelines, and so on. And you might think, data engineers, they're just developers. What's so different about them? Or you might think, alternatively, analyst, that kid that does little cute dashboards and draws pretty little graphs, why should I worry about him? Well, let me give you an example. The year is 2019. We are in the UK offices of a health tech unicorn startup in London, in a part of the office where the platform engineering team sits. The role of the platform engineering team is to build and maintain a stable, secure, and scalable platform infrastructure for the business needs, and also keep everybody out of production data, for it is sensitive. One day, a pair of newly hired data engineers come to this part of the floor, and they say, we need access to production data. Nobody gets access to production data. The holy grail of our existence is to keep people out of production data. It is sensitive. No, you're not getting it. But we need access to production data to do our job. Do it in the dev environment. This time it was the turn of the data engineers to be really surprised. We can't really do it in the dev environment. No, but you have to. Everyone does it. Everyone has access to the dev environment. You're not getting production. They were telling us their requirements, and we just didn't understand them. And equally, what we were explaining to them, that you're not getting access to production because policy and compliance and security and the data is sensitive, none of that made sense to them, because for them, their job is to look at data, actual production data, actual business data, and try to make sense of it and make new products out of it. But none of that made any sense to us. We spoke two very different versions of English. Ironic, in a company called Babylon, we had big goals and big ambitions, and we were all very passionate about building this big thing. But we didn't speak the same language, and we didn't understand each other, unfortunately. And that was the first time I thought, okay, all of the work that we've been doing for the past 2 decades to bridge the gap between developers and operations, we will now have to do again, this time for the data engineers. They are new to the world of traditional-ish engineering. We don't know them, and they have a unique set of requirements and unique set of responsibilities that are unknown to us as platform engineers. So let's look at those challenges. What is so unique about them, right? Well, first is, of course, I need access to production. Like I said, their job is to actually look at your actual production business data and make sense of it. You, like all of you, sit on tons and tons and tons of data. Even your logs are data. And you can do something about it. You can actually figure out whether your product is going well, whether your line of business and your strategy is correct, whether it matches what your users are expecting. What is the user behavior in your app? What is your user and client base? What's the next trend? In order to make sense of all of that, those people actually have to know what's out there in that data and analyze it. They do need access to production. And when we say that data engineers are engineers, they do write code, they will write their pipelines, and ETL, ELT, and so on. And their development will happen in production. We all are very scared of testing in production. Do not test in production. But for data engineers, it is really actually their dev environment. And so we now have to figure out how to give them production data and allow them to play with it securely and safely, because their development, they will write code, they will write their pipelines and models and train their models on production data. Why can we not use dev data? Because mock data is really hard. If we look at this little example of a table that describes some characteristics of a user base. And let's say that this is the dev environment, and the developers have put in 5 rows of data, and they were testing with it, and someone's gender is cat, someone's occupation is a set of random characters, someone lives in Geneva, the other person lives in test 1, and the cat person lives in Whiskers. If you imagine you're an analyst, what can you do with this data? Nothing. It makes no sense. And mock data, generating mock data, is really hard. In fact, there are now companies that specialize in generating mock data for this specific reason. And this is like very, very naive and gentle. Imagine you have a big, hundreds of columns space with loads of customers, and user input is hard. So those companies who specialize in creating mock data, they will get access to your production data and generate mock data out of it. And sometimes it works well, sometimes user input, nested rows, columns, arrays, it doesn't always work. So mock data is hard, and that's why the data engineers, the data people need access to production data to test their stuff. So now we're talking about testing with production. And this is a new and unique challenge. And tell me if you've seen this attitude from developers pre-DevOps. I don't care what it runs on, I just need it to run. I've seen it many times with data engineers, and specifically with ML engineers. I don't care what compute I get. All I want is access to production data and a 96 GPU VM with root access. How you figure out what that actually means, how you figure out how to fulfill that requirement without causing a data breach and a financial collapse, your problem. They don't care. And it becomes really challenging because how do you speak to your customer who says, oh, just give me something, you give me a VM. You cannot have a VM, we don't use VMs, we use containers, okay. And you start talking about this, and if you're an infra person, you probably don't know what ELT means, what inference means. I still don't know what it means to train a model and do inference. And ML engineers keep telling me, oh, we need this and that to train the model, and then the inference is just a container. What do you mean? Come on. So it's really hard. And in the world where we're talking about cloud technologies, there are hundreds of possibilities of how you fulfill that requirement. And if you were to kind of take it and figure out, okay, maybe like containers, maybe we can have some Kubernetes clusters and run it on there and give them access to Postgres or MySQL. And you spend several weeks building that for them to use it, because again, they will not be like tech savvy in the infra space. And you give it to them, and by that point they say, oh, we have pivoted, we now need Vertex AI. It gets challenging, it gets interesting. In that first example where data engineers came to platform engineers and said we need access to production data and nobody understood each other, it took us several months to start speaking the same language. How did we do that? We did eventually figure it out, we did eventually start collaborating. So how did we do that? And more importantly, how do you do that? First one is obvious. Talk to each other. And it might seem naive and really obvious, but I guarantee that you underestimate the power and how efficient it is to just sit down and talk to each other. And I'll give you an example. The example is called Le Forum DevOps. My first job out of uni, EPFL here in Switzerland, was in a private bank in Geneva. I'm a little intern, I land into the core infrastructure team, and my task is to build their configuration management and do it with Puppet and orchestrate with Rundeck and build up the DevOps culture in the bank, and I knew none of those words. But I come and I land in the team and I discovered that the engineering department had installed a weekly meeting that they called Le Forum DevOps, the DevOps Forum. Eager individuals from different teams in different departments would sit down for 1 hour every week and chat. They would talk strategy, their team priorities, what they're working on, the next technology. You can imagine that for people who have probably never interacted before, at the beginning it didn't go very well. And I was a little intern and I didn't dare speak up, And I sat there watching these people argue for 45 minutes straight, saying the exact same thing. And it would happen again and again. They would sit there and argue and argue and argue for 45 minutes, or then we would like, okay, we need to wrap up or something. But they would say the same thing with different words. Eventually, I summoned enough courage to interrupt them and say, stop, you're saying the same thing. You are saying we need to use technology X, and you are saying, no, we need to use the X technology. Come on. Several months later, they started actually understanding each other. They have developed a common language. They have developed a common understanding of what's important. Obviously, there were leaders in certain dimensions, like someone was more passionate about logs, someone cared more about batch processing. But they managed to figure it out. They managed to understand and work together on a common strategy and a common priority, which was fabulous for the engineering department. So talking to each other really works, but it works only if there is willingness and time. You need willing individuals that will sit down together and learn from each other and are open to understanding the other party's priorities. You need willing leaders that will be willing to let that happen, to allow that process to take place and take its time. Because it does take time. It does take time to learn the other person's domain that you have no idea about. It takes time to communicate the priorities and what's important for your team and why it's important for your team. And to teach the other party to understand a little bit about your domain. And that is the next thing. You need to try to build a global vision. For data engineers, it's really important to understand how and why systems are built in your organization. Yes, they only care about data, but they also have to understand about how to build a new system. Are you using configuration management or infrastructure as code? If so, why? If so, which one? What are the security practices? Why can they not provision a VM with root access and probably leave port 422 open with no firewalls? Equally, for the infrastructure people, it's really important to understand what is the priority of the data engineers and why, what are they working on and why? What is the new feature that they have promised to the board of directors and the investors? And what will it take for the infra team to help them? More often than not, I've seen this so many times, the core infrastructure team has their path, has their priorities, has built their goals for the quarter. And the data team has built their roadmap. They've never spoken to each other. The roadmap of the infra team is to upgrade the Kubernetes cluster to the latest version. The goal of the data team is to build a near real-time batch processing. They go ahead and work on their things. They haven't ever spoken to each other. 3 months into the quarter, the data team is like, hey, infra team, we have this cool pipeline. Where can we run it? And the infra team is like, I don't know. We have no functionality for batch processing. We have no functionality for your access. Who are you? Why haven't you come to us 3 months before? So you really need to build a global vision. Sometimes it makes sense to have a dedicated platform engineering team, data platform engineering team, or a dedicated MLOps team. The infra teams, the core infra teams, are usually at capacity or overboard. They have way too much to do. They have no time to spend. So sometimes it makes sense to have a dedicated team that will deal with the platform side of things for the data team, which is great because then they will probably understand better what an ETL and ELT means, what's a DAG, what's a data pipeline, why they need to use inference, do inference. But at the same time, they have to understand how things are built in your organization. And there is a big risk to it. But the risk is that everyone has their tunnel vision. They only are focusing on their thing. And missing out on the other one. But in fact, in order to build the whole common thing, you will have to not have that little tunnel vision. You will have to have a global vision. I'll illustrate it with another example. In this particular company, the team of SREs was hired to help out with the operations side of the engineering business. The core infra team was obviously at capacity. They had loads of priorities. But this SRE team had some capacity, but they were just freshly hired. They were just figuring it out. So they were asked to help out with the new MLOps platform, to help out the ML engineers build and deploy their things, right? So they come in and they do their thing. I've never speaking to the core infra team. Several months later, the core infra team is brought into the project, and they discover that what the ML people were describing as I just launch a task in the cloud and I have access to S3 actually meant a vanilla ECS cluster. So not serverless, not just I launch a task in the cloud, an actual cluster with VMs and auto-scaling groups that was built with almost a complete disregard to the company's software lifecycle policy. The company didn't use ECS before. They used EKS, another version of the Amazon Kubernetes product. So nobody used ECS before. And the access to S3 meant a bunch of IAM policies that allowed S3 star on star, which means read, write, and delete access to all data. That's not great, is it? Oh, the joys that, the wonderful few days that the infra team had. Why did this happen? How did this happen? It was a combination of two things. One-sided understanding, so the SREs knew the requirements of the MLOps people and knew how to fulfill them, but had no idea about the policies, practices, and standards of the organization they were in. And the ML engineers didn't care what their things ran on. I just launch a task in the cloud. I don't care if it's a container, a VM, a GPU, a TPU, how much it costs. They have no knowledge of that, which is okay. But this could have been avoided had the SRE team and the ML ops team speak to the core infrastructure team and take time to understand how and why things are built in that company. This 3-star at 4-star wouldn't happen. But you need to remember that you're not each other's enemy. Even the SREs that allowed S3 star on star. Even the platform engineers that are telling you that you cannot have access to production data. You are not each other's enemy. You are there to work together. And you need to remember that the other side probably is really good at their job. And they just don't have to be good at your job as well. Equally, you are really good at your job, but you don't have to be good in their job. You just need to take the time to kind of upskill each other just enough in each other's domains. Take some time to take each other through the most obscure and confusing parts of your domain, to build that global vision and global understanding. And next time you receive a message from the opponent team that makes you want to throw your laptop out of the window and become a shepherd in the Canton de Valais, remember that they're just trying to do their job, just as you are trying to do your job. And all of the above goes to the same goal. Actively seek to build trust. Trust is the most important component of all of it. And once you have worked together and you've taken the time and you are willing to learn and you're willing to open up your mind and not throw your laptop out of the window, allow the other team to do what they need to do and allow yourself to understand what their priorities are, and they are not working against you. They're working with you, and you need to kind of communicate better. Once you have taken the time, once you have spoken to each other, once you have discussed and learned from each other, you will be able to trust each other and build cool things together. In that first example of 2019 and the health tech startup, we eventually did build a common language. We started speaking the same version of English, and we were able to work together towards the same goal. This is a comment on my LinkedIn from a former colleague who was in the data team at the time. We were all trying to do the right thing in different ways. And eventually, we started doing the right thing in the same way and walking towards that big goal. But for that, you need trust. And trust is the most important ingredient to effective collaboration. Eventually, my analysts could write Terraform, which I'm very proud of. They couldn't build a whole new system on their own, but they were skilled enough in infrastructure to manage some parts of it to some extent. And equally, when they came to me and they were like, I need to run a data web app, what does that mean? But I did understand what they meant, because they took the time to explain to me, and I took the time to learn what is important for them and what are the products that they are using. But we trusted each other. We started trusting the other team. The data team trusted that we would find the time to help them, and we trusted that they are not going to run a 96 GPU VM with root access and port 22 open with no firewalls. So to recap, data engineers are the new kid on the engineering block. They are the very important kid on the engineering block because data is the future. That's how every business will figure it out in the turbulent times we live in. Their language and their objectives are different, and they haven't been seen before. They are unknown to like the info people. But we need to take time to understand them and to learn from them. Build trust and talk to each other. Take time, talk to each other. That is all from me. Thank you very much.